I said, what nonsense are you talking? You are going to win the gold medal in Beijing. What do you mean you're going to give up shooting? And I just said it because that's what you want to say to make an athlete feel good at the time. He reminded me after he won in Beijing. He told me that you had said this. And I was just frozen. And I remember saying this to him.
Hello and welcome. My name is Kushal Shah, and you're listening to Nails and Hammers, a podcast where we talk to different people about their journeys and understand how they take decisions and solve different problems. This podcast helps you understand yourself and the world around you by learning from what others have already figured out. If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Nails and Hammers on your favorite podcasting platform. Today, I'm talking with the amazing Sharda Ogra, who is a senior sports journalist with ESPN. We talked to Sharda about her early days, how she became a journalist, and pick her brain about what sports journalism is all about. It's time to listen and learn. Hi Sharda, welcome to the Nails and Hammers podcast.
Hi, Kushal. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invite.
Yep. So I wanted to start from the very beginning. Can you share a bit with us about where did you grow up and where all did you study?
I grew up in Bombay, which is now Mumbai. It was Bombay at the time. I studied at a school in Thane called Holy Cross Convent. And I went to college at St. Xavier's. This was from 1984 to 89. I was in St. Xavier's College. And I got a BA in history. And that was all the study that I did.
Mm-hmm. And so while you were at college, you took an interview of Imran Khan. So how did that come about?
See, the Imran Khan story actually has a lot to do with my friend, Ramola Talwar, who was a massive Imran fan. We were all Imran fans. She was another degree Imran fan. And she said, let us try and speak to him because he's coming to India. There was a series that was there and let's try. And we say we're speaking for the college magazine. It'll be fun if we can get it. I'd have no idea where out of our imagination that came. Both of us were studying English at the time. She went on to graduate in 6 papers of English and I did history. Anyway, so that's how the thing came about. And we went about it in completely the most methodical kind of manner that you can imagine. You know, we called up. There was a hotel phone. We called up. We asked for him. And at some point in time, we got through or didn't get through. And we went and we left a letter because I don't think we could get through to start with. We went and left a letter and said, this is who we are and whatever. And there was me and there was another Shazia Khan who was a friend of ours. That's how we went about it. And it was, now when you look at it, it was so simple to get that done, you know, because you could get access to athletes if you went about it the sort of methodical way. And we were fortunate that Imran said, yes, come and speak to me. It's not a problem. And all the adventure was just basically, now you look at it, was just logistical. Yep. How are we going to get there? He's asked us to come to the ground. How are we going to get there if we don't have tickets? He said he's going to leave tickets. We went and got the tickets and we went to the ground. But we couldn't see him. So, so it just kind of got, it was all logistical. He wasn't going to abandon us at any point in time. Yep. If you look back, he said, I'll speak to you. He spoke to us. And he was a huge star at the time. This was before the Pakistan 92 World Cup, but he was a huge star. He was sort of part of that quartet of all-rounders at the time. And all of them, I have to say that it was just a very different time to be young and starstruck because you could reach the stars. You could actually try and reach them and talk to them. And it was a good interview. He spoke to us for about 40 minutes. At no point did he say, this is a stupid question. So we were quite relieved. We were very, very convinced that we had to ask him questions about cricket and ask him questions that were proper, professional. Ask him a few questions about sort of personality and growing up and ambitions and so on. But basically be as cricket-centric as we possibly could be because we were fundamentally cricket fans. And that's how it worked out. You know?
And then what happened after the interview was published?
Chaos in our college. Chaos and complete envy. Of who are these girls, and particularly the guys got so angry. Who are these girls who went and interviewed these, who interviewed Imran? And obviously, when the interview was printed, I don't know whether we offered it first to midday and they refused, or we offered it to afternoon next. I can't remember the sequence of events. It was a long time ago. But I remember in college there was just complete envy. I think there was some complete sort of annoyance and how dare you?
No.
How dare you? Ladki log, like, but. That's what it was. And once we did that, we realized that we got paid for it. So at that time, we got paid $200 for the interview being published. At that time, it was a lot of money. And we said, listen, if you can do this once if we can maybe speak to everybody else. It's fun. It's something you get to do. You build a portfolio, around it, So that's what happened. And we sort of interviewed about 5 or 6 people more after that, including some pretty big names. We interviewed Sid Richards, Kapil Dev, Srikanth, Bruce Reed, John Wright, Neil Foster. Yeah. So it wasn't too bad.
Yep. So your relationship with John Wright goes long back.
I don't think I realized that.
Yep.
I don't think he was spooked when I told him about it after decades, and we had photographs and everything. So it was, but we were trying not to be too kind of fan type. So we would take pictures of them and not take pictures of us with them. That was our thing. So it was all that nonsense. It was a big adventure. And the people at Taj, at the hotel where they used to stay, were very tolerant. They recognized after some time, the security guys and all that, okay, these people have come again, but there must be something there. They're not just there to chase people for autographs. It was great fun. We spoke to a couple, and John Tricos also. How could I forget John Tricos? This was during the World Cup, the 1987 World Cup. So because he was captain of Zimbabwe, we interviewed him as well. Yeah, so I think that's the whole list that I've got.
And so what's your advice on cold calling or sending a cold email to athletes for young journalists?
See, now, because the whole thing has completely changed, the advice on cold calling is call. My tip to any journalist is literally, if you want to be a nuisance, but in a nice and a polite way. Be polite for everything. Politeness and manners will work at some point. It will open not maybe 10 out of 10 doors, maybe not 9, but 6 or 7 to ho jayega, even though those 3 or 4 doors that have not opened up, big ones, and you would have liked it and all that, it happens. I mean, what you do is, I remember the time I did a story on Jasprit Bumrah. Yeah. I tried every possible way to reach him, every way. But the point is, because now there are so many gatekeepers and so many barriers to getting to an athlete, that sometimes it doesn't work out, his management doesn't want him to talk. His agent doesn't want him to talk. The team is angry with all reporters, so they don't want you to talk to them. There's that other jazz that was going on for some time. That is the thing. But the point is, you have to try. If it means calling, I have a favorite Saurav Ganguly statistic. I once called him, I think it was 28 times in 4 days to try and get to speak to him. But that is because it was Saurav, who was perfectly fine. When I saw him, he said, "But I always talk to you," which is also so call. If you need to call. If you need to message. But do it with complete courtesy, and do it with till the point that they say no, get lost. Yep. Then you get the message and you say, "Okay, I tried." That's the advice to cold call or message or whatever. Yep. There has to be a point at which they say, "I do not want to speak to you. Get out of my life." Then you back off. Then you say, "Okay, now I won't."
Yeah. And so, at what point did you decide that sports journalism was a career that you wanted to pursue?
I didn't think it could be a career. I knew I wanted to be in the business of words somehow, and because I did BA in history, and you don't really do too much with the BA degree in the 1990s. So I was wondering, what do you do? Do you have to study more? I didn't. So I thought it would be journalism of some sort, but I didn't think it would be sport. I always wanted to do something around sports journalism because I liked reading, and I used to be a very rubbish level recreational player. But what happened when my friend Ramola comes into this again is that I had joined Xavier's Institute of Communication Journalism School, and the people at the Indian Express came looking for interns, and they had a course, the exam and interview and everything. So I made it to the last 7 along with Ramola and another common friend of ours. And instead of the last 3 or 4, I didn't get picked in the last 3 or 4, the 2 of them got. So they were feeling worse that they had got picked and I had not got picked. They were feeling so crap. So then, a day or 2 days later, Ramola told me, and at that time we had no mobile phone, so we are calling with 50 paise coins. What's up? What's happening now? That was teenage conversation. So her mother said, she told me that her mother had told her that Midday has placed an ad for a sports reporter in their newspaper and tell Sharda to apply, which her mother has even forgotten about it. They tell her to apply. So I applied, and I went with my afternoon dispatch and courier interviews, all of them, as sort of proof of my writing. They asked me to write a piece about when girls like cricket or something. It was about women and cricket. And it was, how do you explain to people that you really like cricket and that you know about cricket, or you informed about it, and you're not just some groupie type of person. So they made me write an article, and then they said, okay, can you join? So I said, of course. They said, okay, but we have to do one more test. There's a match happening in Nagpur. We don't have any. And I was going to Nagpur. I said, but I have to go for Diwali vacation, which is also true. So I said, okay, I said, I'm going to Nagpur for Diwali vacation. So they said, okay, there's a match going on there. Can you cover it for us? I said, of course, with complete, confidence that, yeah, I'll be able to cover a match. Big deal. So they gave me you didn't need a letter to say that you were from Midday. You had nothing. You just walked into the ground and you said, I have come from Midday. I want to cover the match. And they said, or maybe Midday had given me a letter. Maybe they had given me a letter. And I was using somebody else's telex card. And I wrote a short report on the match for them. And they said, fine. And I got hired after I came back. Correct. I think they'd hired me by then. And they said, when can you join? I said, I'm going to Nagpur for vacation. They said, take a match cover. It wasn't a small match. That was Pakistan versus England where Salim Malik played a super innings. In that match that Pakistan won. Yeah, imagine Pakistan versus England in Nagpur. This is happening. Yeah.
So was Salim Malik the captain back then? Or?
No. Salim Malik was not captain. This was Nehru Cup. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And how different was the process back then of covering a match or talking to athletes?
And now I look at it with a breeze. The difficulty lay in how you got your story out to the office in time. So basically you're working on typewriters, you're functioning on the access to the ground. Nagpur, they had the greatest facility possible for reporters. You would go there and you would just submit your copy. You had typed a copy which you had to write in advance. You had to write, say, a morning copy because it was midday. So you typed it out, you put it out, and they would type it for you on the telex machine. They would send it to your office. This didn't happen everywhere. So more access to players is not a problem. Access to the ground is not a problem. You could walk around the ground during the match. There was no anti-corruption unit. There were no media managers. It was almost amateur in a way. That okay, chalo, we're all in this together, and this is what we're doing. And one girl has come. Well, all right, we'll manage. So. But it was fine. It wasn't difficult at all. There was almost a relationship of partnership when it came to dealing with players. That we are in this together. That you are here to tell our story, and that's what the thing is about. That's what the whole business is about. And after some time, you sort of realize that if you approached a player professionally in a proper way, you would be able to talk to them about something or the other. There would have been some complete like dogs. But then you just didn't go close to them at all. You didn't bother, you didn't go there. So it was a good environment to break into. Of course, it was competitive. Journalism is competitive. But you just did your thing. And because I wasn't working for a morning paper, I was working for an afternoon paper. I had to just write copies in a different way. At that time, my copy would have been more quote-centric rather than match-centric. The match report would have been a match report because the game had just been seen on television in a very small way. It wasn't this explosion of the quality of the telecast wasn't great as to what you guys are used to seeing now. So in many ways, you had to tell a very simple story to start with. This is before cable television came in the early 90s, and then that changed the whole equation.
Mm-hmm. And how did you keep yourself motivated in such a male-dominated industry?
I think I keep telling people it's almost like I have blinkers. Like I don't see what anyone is saying around me. I like my friends from college who are still my friends to this day. We still talk every few days. We are in touch with each other. We are in a group of WhatsApp, all that. So I know I had my friends and I had like a backup support team, if you like. I think that my family was fantastic. They were just excited. My dad used to be an athlete in his college days. And so he was also fully, excited that I'm doing this job. At that time, because you're working almost like a donkey and you're paying no attention to what's happening outside you. I had a very supportive work environment also. Midday was a great place to start and to work there. So I don't think there was a question of me not having motivation. I mean, the motivation at that point was I have to write the best story for the paper that there is. I have to write the story for the paper that nobody else has. And that our readers of our paper will say, oh, that's great, what's appeared there. So it was that. There were coldness from certain of the older journalists that were there. Some of them were very, very cordial and nice. Some of them were just cold and pretended like you didn't exist, but it was fine. And I was always helped by officials, by scorers. The players were quite cool themselves. It was fine. So it wasn't a motivation thing as much as it was having that energy and the time, the hours in the day to do what you want. While I worked for Midday, I also did radio reports, news reports for ABC's Overseas Service Radio Australia. I used to call in voice reports. It paid very well. So I called in voice reports to them about, say, twice or thrice a week of Indian sport, what was happening, big stories, sort of biggish, not national champions or international events. It's largely to be cricket. So it was, and you have to do that through a collect call on the telegraph office. So you're just moving around. So your physical load on you was to communicate it, to get a story across. That was much more, rather than sort of it being difficult in a way to get access. There are too many reporters. There are too many gatekeepers. It was not that at all.
And following up on the story part, what kind of preparation goes into coming up with a story? Or
it depends on what you're doing. If you're going to an event, I mean, I did a lot of multi-sport because I worked in Midday. I was the sports department only for some time. For a few months, maybe a year and a half, I was the sports department. So you did all kinds of things. So I think just the first thing, before you go anywhere, I think you have to be just prepared with as much information. You are knowing specifically what you're going to, and then you look at the topic that you're going to have to cover, report on, and you do as much background reading as you can. If you're going to do a story on an individual person, then you also do as much background reading as you can and speak to as many people about them in the event that you may not get to speak to them. The best thing is, they will speak to you. In the event that they don't, and this kind of training, I got a lot of it with India Today, where I worked for about 10 years. At the Hindu, what the Hindu did for me, where I left after Midday, was that I got a good base to covering actual matches, to meeting those deadlines, to doing all the other, the other sort of nitty gritty of sports reporting. But in a way, that sports reporting was almost on its last legs of sort of how do you report a match. Other than, say, if you're doing, it's not fair to say it's on the last legs, because the Hindu still does very thorough coverage of all sports events. Their national championships are covered with full izzat. So you just prepare by doing as much background reading and speaking to as many people as you can, particularly if you're doing something that is a largish kind of a story, a long form story, or, you try and find out things about the person or the place that will tell you something new that you can then chase and follow that strain or that story, and then that you can do. I was asked to cover a few matches at the Under-17 World Cup in India, and then you do that by reading up. So I had a match, Mexico, Spain, England. And so then that's what you do. You just go about finding out all the strains of those particular teams that are coming. Who are they? What is their story? What is it? Now, because the internet is all like at your fingertips. In the older days, you needed books, you needed to ask people, you needed to get stats, you needed to call up statisticians and scorers and say, what is that person's average against Australia? How did you do in the last series? That was like I said, the process of gathering and disseminating information has now become much faster. At that time, gathering and dissemination took a long time. It was just because it was the pre-internet age.
In the internet age, especially, athletes are much more accessible to the general audience. Earlier, you were a sort of a bridge between the athletes and their fans. So how has the role of journalists changed now?
There was a very interesting interview that was done by Dave Zirin, the sports writer in the US, and Robert Lipsyte, who said that Robert Lipsyte hung out with Muhammad Ali, went to dinner with him, did this, that kind of sort of buddy kind of relationship that was there. And that whole thing of what happens on tour stays on tour in cricket, that happens. It's a very male sort of centric kind of discussion, trope that they do. That kind of thing has now been erased because there is a certain distance also between the journalist and the athlete. Now what you have to do is maybe write differently about that person. If it means writing things that are not particularly, not gossipy, but basically trying to find out everything about everything becomes your job in a way. not just you're not trying to trash them only, but you're trying to find out many aspects of what they do, of who they
Mhm.
are, what makes them this way. And
Mhm.
you do know, I mean, when I was speaking to Sidvi on his podcast, I said that every generation needs writers to tell its stories, because even though you have Instagram and you have Twitter and you have Facebook and whatever, you're not going to be known 25 years down the line when there's someone that has come and hits bigger sixes or takes more wickets or has a better wicket celebration than you did. You're not going to be remembered by your Instagram posts.
Mhm.
You are going to be remembered by what is written about you. To cut off access to people that write about you, you're doing a disservice to your own legacy in a sense, you know. So by saying that I will not give interviews because everybody wants interviews and all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I understand that, but there's a way to do it. So that's why you hear such fun stories about about Bishan Singh Bedi and players from the 70s and players from the 80s and even players the older when I was just a young journalist about those stories about some New Zealand team throwing down beer cans from a hotel. I don't know what they were throwing, beer cans only from a hotel roof doing some celebration, some
Wow.
nonsense. So now everything has been sanitized and anodized. So there will be no stories coming out of it. There'll be no folklore. So it's almost like the folklore has been stopped by social media saying, okay, we are the folklore. We are sending you a photograph of us smashed cake on each other's face. Even in the Tendulkar era, which was hugely personality driven because Sachin was so huge, he was never always accessible. He controlled how much access there was there, but he gave access.
Mhm.
Particularly, say in the latter half of his career, when he was older. When he was younger, he was very, 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 very quiet. Very didn't say much. When he was older, he just became a much more relaxed guy when it came to talking with people. I mean, I
Mhm.
think if any superstar needs advice on how to manage their image or how to manage their self or how to manage their career, they should take it from Tendulkar, because look at the amount we have written on him. How much, in how many ways, you know, by talking to him, by what he says, by whatever.
Mhm. Do athletes ever respond to you with feedback, and how do you process that?
Sometimes they do. Gopichand once told me that he thought what I had. He said, "How did you know?" Which to me was the biggest compliment I ever got from anybody. Because I wrote some article on him for when he won the All England, and he said, "How did you know?" So for someone to say, "How did I know?" That's like the greatest thing. You know, to just say, "Okay, I'm stopping now. I retire. I will go away." So you do get feedback. I remember I wrote something for, for cricket for Mr. Srinivasan. I got so much feedback from all his supporters. It's not funny, but that was sort of like they're trying to bully you into saying you cannot write like this. I said, I'm sorry. Is there a fact in this that's not correct? So you get some of that feedback. You just as you get older, I think when you're younger, you just get intimidated if somebody doesn't like what you say about them. When you are older, you just want to say, please, yeah, I'm too old, yeah. Stop it now. I'm not going to be bullied by you.
Mhm.
You're like 10 years younger than me. That's your fallback defense, or call it what you will.
Mhm.
I mean, what I find really strange that in press conferences currently, I hear that people are taking pot shots at journalists and nobody's saying anything. And there's me and a couple of older guys. We call ourselves dinosaurs. We say, we would have stood up in that press conference and said, like, what is wrong with you? How can you say these things? But these are basically cricketers I'm talking about. How can you say these things? What do you mean? Yeah, we are here. We are here to do a job. So there, because this whole thing of, oh, your access will be cut off. Access is now the big thing. So I suppose for younger people, I understand that it's difficult. For me, it's because I'm older. I can say, Bhaiya, now if you're not giving access, what to do? You're not giving. It's okay. I'm too old, to cry about it. And if my boss tells me something or whatever. For younger people, I understand what position that leaves them in. So therefore, they are there. So that, like I said, there was that mutual sort of engagement between the actual athlete and the journalist was much more almost like a partnership. That is over, over,
Mhm.
over without a doubt. That is gone. That's a bit sad. And in a way, it's good because then you are able to dissect people in a much more dispassionate way and write about it using data, using somebody else's, some expert's view on it. So in a way, it's good, but a lot of the Zyka is the word that you use. That Zyka has of how what you write about sport starts to sort of ebb away because
Mhm.
it is this large conglomerate of broadcaster, brand, and that has come into it at the moment. It is sad. In a lot of smaller Indian sports, it's still there. It's great fun. So because I work for ESPN India now, the website that's multi-sport, and I do a lot of writing on Indian football. I find that footballers seem to have the most agency to speak their mind and say what they feel, as compared to any other sports people. And it's a great time to have been through these 30 years, not 40 yet, these 30 years in journalism, seeing all the changes that have taken place in Indian sport. And,
How do you speak to athletes after they have had a major loss?
uh, I have an absolute killer story about this. Okay, so what you have to do is, it's very difficult to talk to them. So you just try, and now because you can message them on phone, it's much easier than if you just run into them. You just see them somewhere. I think you sympathize with them because you do know, because eventually, as you grow older, you realize they are very young people. They are very young people, and they suddenly are doing this thing which is making them seem much more important, and their skill much more important than what it is in the wider system. I think you speak to them with as much thing of bad luck, of saying bad luck. And I remember when India lost the 2003 World Cup final, we didn't have the guts to go and talk to players and all. We were wandering around the hotel lobby wondering what to do. We didn't have the guts to talk to them because they were like absolutely distraught. And John Wright came out to do his press conference and everything. He cannot press conference, he came to talk to the press the morning after it was there. Because I think he said, Acha, chalo, now let me just go and he turned up. So after that, he said, so I remember Harbhajan Singh told somebody else, he said, what is this bad luck people keep telling me? What is this luck? How do I miss it? Do you know that we are going through? How do I know I'm ever going to play in a World Cup final again? But he did. The great thing is that he did, that he was able to. About 8 years later, he played in a World Cup. He said, how do I know? Will this ever come to me again? Will the opportunity ever come to me again? So you do realize how awful they feel. When now Abhinav Bindra is completely stoic and he's completely calm, and he's been like that since he was 16 years old. And he reached the final. He missed the final at the Sydney Olympics by half a point or something. He reached the final in Athens. So there was him, and this was the same day. This was the day after Suma Shirur. So we had two Indians in a shooting final at the Olympics, which was a very big deal. So Suma didn't make it the previous time. And he didn't make it. He did the second. So this was his first final. He was standing there and he just saying outside, and his family was around him and they were supporting. And so this is completely not like cricket, the reporters are not even going to pay attention to you because you are shooting. Who cares? They've gone on to the next thing, hockey, whatever. So this was 2004 and he was about 20 years old. He was like quite distraught. He said, I'm just giving up. This sport is ridiculous. And he was just like venting. He never vents. He's very, very calm. And he was just saying, I'm fed up and whatever. And he said, what rubbish and whatever. So I said to him, what? I'm going to quit from shooting. I said, what nonsense are you talking? You are going to win the gold medal in Beijing. What do you mean you're going to give up shooting? And I just said it because that's what you want to say to make an athlete feel good at the time. And I just said it because I was saying, okay, like logically see. This was in my mind because I was also disappointed. We were all disappointed. That, he didn't make the final. Then he made the final. Now he has to win a medal. So chalo, gold is sahi. And he remembered that. And I had forgotten about it. And he remembered it, and he wrote. He reminded me after he won in Beijing. He told me that you had said this, and I was just frozen. And I remember saying this to him. I remember saying once I said, yeah, I had said this to him. I did say it to him because you say these things. You say it because that's your way to say that. Listen, you have to. I don't know how athletes do it. I would be just crushed and not be able to get out of bed for 1 month. But that's the athletic excellence and that thing in them that they just get up the next day and they compete. Like the athlete, the wrestler who has been knocked out in the first round is waiting to get a chance. That repechage is the second chance. So he gets a second chance. So I don't know how athletes do it, but you try and talk to them. What you absolutely do not do is try and tell them where they went wrong, because that is not the thing to do. It's just, and be as quiet and be as sympathetic as possible. And they'll come back after some time. And they will tell you that when I look back, this is what happened. And they will process it and tell you. Your job is to be witness and to be quiet. And if they're crying in a corner, you let them cry and you take as many notes and details of the situation and the environment around them in your head, or if you're more shameless, as in your notes, That if you need it at another point in time, it's there. That whole event is there in your head.
What was your toughest interview and what made it so tough?
In what sense tough?
In terms of a lot of athletes or coaches do not give much information
Yeah.
and extracting
Yes.
that out of them.
Yes. Okay. No, it wasn't. I won't name the player because he was very sweet. Eventually, I sat 40 minutes talking to he was so hospitable and nice. I went to his flat to meet him. It was a bachelor flat in Bombay, and he was talking, and I was taking my recorder was on, and he was saying nothing. I mean, he was saying useful things, but nothing that sort of gave a story like some zing. So I was thinking, oh God, what is going on? Where is this going to, it was just like a nightmare. And I kept saying, okay, how bad is it? I kept asking one stupid question after the other. And I said, because one useful question to ask an athlete, this is a key trick question, not a trick question, it's a standard question. You ask them, was there any point in your life that you wanted to give up? Or any point during that event or that tour or that you wanted to give up? And then they'll tell you something. So I think that's what I asked him. And then that whole story came out. Everything came out. So that's the thing, that you have to wait and you have to. So what Sriram Dira also gave me a great tip. He said, when an athlete is talking, just after some time, keep quiet, because then they will just try and fill the silence, because they'll just keep talking because you're sitting there and watching them quietly. I don't do that very well. I kind of try and interrupt and very well. Yeah. So it was that cricketer story was one. There was one hilarious thing we did once. We had they had this big, there was a Champions Trophy in India, Champions Trophy, 2009. So they had this sort of media circus where they had about 8 or 9 teams or 4 or 5 teams come through, and they sat on these tables and they went through. An English player was giving you such rotten answers. The story I was doing was trying to understand how do you chase and, so break up the elements of one-day cricket into various sort of parts. How do you chase? How do you defend a score? The things about fielding. And English cricket was just being dreadful because he was a star and we wanted to hear things about him, but he was just sort of he was just dismissing the questions like they were nothing. Like, oh, I don't know. Oh, it's so fun. He was trying to be cheeky, but he was saying nothing that was going to help you in your story. And it wasn't a one-on-one interview. There were other people sitting around as well, other reporters. I was too frustrating. It was too frustrating. But everybody else helped with all the information, so the story turned out fine.
Mm-hmm. And how should one go about writing a book?
You mean a ghosted book or one's own book?
Probably one's own book, where you have to come up with a story and then, the whole process of overcoming the writer's block.
Okay. What everyone tells you about writer's block is you have to write 1,000 words a day. And I think it's a great exercise, but I'm absolutely useless at doing it. The 2 books, I can tell you, the 2 books that I worked on, both with John Wright and with Yuvraj, they were basically just a reflection of what they were doing. What you needed mostly was a structure. Start a book, whether it's a ghosted book or whether it's your own book, with having a structure of what you want to say. Fiction, I have no idea. Fiction do not even involve me in this. It is not my thing at all. So you start a book with sort of a structure around what you're going to say it. And if you can, ideally break it down into chapters. Mm-hmm. If you have a structure, then you have chapters, then you know what those chapters will contain. And that's how it's a basic sort of have a framework around which to start. Mm-hmm. You could.
And one last question about journalism. Yes. What's the worst part of your job and what assumptions do people make of it?
What is the worst? See, my job has been very good to me, so I can't even say what the worst part about it. The worst job, I think, is having to transcribe crappy press conference quotes. Transcribing an interview is fun because then you get to hear the person speak again in their own voice and you can hear tone and whatnot. Transcribing press conference quotes is the worst thing in the world because they are saying nothing, because public wants to read it. The boys have played well, whatever. You get all of that, we did the processes right, we did the processes wrong. And particularly with TV, you get so much of that now because there is just this cliche of what media managers, which we thought was a great thing, but now I think it's like a big sin because it's you lost the individuality of the person to say whatever they want to say and it just blurt it out. And I think in many ways, sometimes it's almost become like, that the readers are being called viewers, consumers. You're getting into all those kind of conversations. So the kind of things you have to say have to cater to that sort of an audience. That no one is really interested to know that there are unethical things going on behind the scenes. So this whole thing of conflict of interest, when it came about, everyone in cricket was so confused. They couldn't understand what it meant. And it was, it just was mad. Which bubble are you living in, guys? So I think sometimes not writing about things because they are not hot topics, or they are not, many hits or whatever gettable. Even though fundamentally there is something in an ecosystem that's happening that is unfair, wrong, unbalanced. That is a difficult thing. And I think that happened at the start a lot with match fixing. Like, we didn't know what was going on. We genuinely had no clue what was happening, and that there is this industry that exists behind it. And, so like the whole situation about the Kohli conflict of interest case that is up now, and that particular example of conflict of interest has existed with Indian captains and their managements since the time I've been working and since the time managements began. So I think that's the job. When people say otherwise it's a fun job, it's a great job.
I now want to shift focus to know more about Sharda as a person.
Yes.
So how do you stay at the top of your game?
I don't think of it as the top of anything. I just want to do whatever I write. I just want to write it in a way that's readable, informative, interesting. And every time I finish writing something, I'll say, and I see it published, and I'll say, yuck, what have I written? And then after 3 months, I'll go back to it and say, okay, it's not too bad. That's my normal sort of a reaction. And don't take yourself too seriously. Don't take who you are too seriously. Don't take what you do too seriously. That's a very important quality to have.
What keeps you away from social media?
Oh, see, I don't want to get abused for free. Yeah, free mein gali khana. I like it that people say you should be on social media, and I appreciate the fact and whatever. But free mein main gali kyun khaungi? You are supporting somebody, I am supporting somebody, it's okay. You say what you say. So I know that people get into like heated arguments about sport or whatever, but I get into it for about 5 minutes and then I say, it's okay, it's fine, it's your view. I can't change it, you can't change mine, and we're fine, that's it. Now social media, that will go on for about 20,000, or not 20,000 is too flattering, for about say 20 exchanges on a thread, I am on social media, as I use social media to follow news. I use not Facebook, not Insta. I've joined because I want to follow some teams that are doing something in this lockdown time. So they have these programs, So I just follow a little bit of that. I think it was may have been Chetri and Kohli or something like that. Was that on Instagram? Chetri and Kohli?
Yes, that was on Instagram, like some
that's the reason
Puma
why.
thing.
Correct. That's the reason why I joined. To follow. But I follow news on it, but I have nothing to say on the platform. Where I have to say, I say. Yeah.
So that's like a secretive profile that you have.
That's a khufia Twitter account. Yeah. But nobody will find it because I haven't put one tweet anywhere. I have no fingerprint on social media.
What's your best travel story?
So 2 stories. One is in 1996, we traveled to Goa. Me and 2 other journalists, 2 other papers, traveled to Goa to cover a sailing championship. It was the best assignment of my life. Because nobody cared what we were doing. There was no pressure on us to write whatever. We wrote accurately whatever we had. But we spent days out in the water. We spent a whole week, so that was fun. The other great trip, I've made many actually, if I think about it. I went to Iran to cover Vishwanathan Anand's, that last thing of winning the World Championship, because India Today wanted a cover story. So we went there for 3 days. Absolutely fabulous time. Great time, because it's such a completely different culture, environment, everything. I think I got arrested, but because I was taking photographs where I wasn't supposed to take photographs. And the people that said, said, come and speak to our journalism class. I said, okay. And I think there were cops wondering, who is this woman taking photographs? But it turned out fine. I was released after about 45 minutes. They said, okay, you can go. And the poor hotel people had got really panicked because I had vanished for some time, 45 minutes, or maybe more, I can't remember. Then I went to the Northeast a couple of years ago to do a story on football in the Northeast. Amazing journey. Amazing stories, amazing memories from that time. So there can't be one. There are many. Like I think about it, covering Hansi Cronje's trial, and in Cape Town. Again, just pure chance. So many. I mean, even the South Africa World Cup was great. Traveling on the bus, on the train to St. Petersburg, and the railway station where it wasn't the railway station where Gandhiji was thrown off the train, but it was around there. So it was good. It was good. It's been fun.
What have you learned from watching athletes so closely?
I mean, I think just their capacity for doing the boring things every day. In this, training is the most boring thing that they can do, but doing it every day with consistency. Consistency is the hardest thing for people to do, even with something that they love. But they just ace it all the time. And I think for Indian athletes particularly, the optimism, despite everything with which they take to every sport, they are indefatigable. No matter what the system does to crush them, and to defeat them, and everyone say no, but they are stars. But the number, the percentage of the stars that come out from this mass of athletes that train is huge. But every athlete, before they bake it, is pushing themselves against a wall the whole time, and they're pushing it with optimism. They're pushing it with that sort of spirit of, no, I want to do this, I can do it. That kind of thing is very hard to. Sometimes you wonder where it comes from, because you think they should know better that, boss, it's very difficult, give up. But they never give up. Athletes never give up.
And lastly, what advice would you give to a 25-year-old Sharda today?
Oh, 25-year-old. Don't work so hard, yaar. But maybe that's not the thing. Yeah, don't fight so much for superstars. Don't take up the case for superstars so much. Don't bother about it. Don't get into arguments in office with friends, with whatever, for superstars. They don't care about you. Stop it. Don't be so emotionally invested in a superstar, in superstardom, and its good points and its great things. And don't be dazzled by what looks fantastic, because it's not. What looks beautiful and perfect, and it's not. There's a lot of creepy shit happening everywhere.
We'll end with a short rapid fire round. Favorite person to interview?
Ian Thorpe, the Australian swimmer. It would have lasted 15 minutes, but fantastic.
Favorite sport?
Cricket, undeniably.
Best sporting memory?
Watching Abhinav Bindra win the gold medal in Beijing.
Your favorite writer other than you?
I'm not my favorite writer, first of all. Not even my 27th favorite writer, Peter Roebuck.
A sporting event on your bucket list that you haven't been to?
The World Cup football.
And lastly, any upcoming Indian journalists that we should follow?
Follow all the young writers. There are many. Susan Jonathan in my office, Susan Nainan, Jonathan Selvaraj in my office. There's Mihir Vasavda in Indian Express. All the guys at Indian Express. Shivani Nayak, of course, fantastic. There's so many now. If I don't take names, I'm very stuck. They all know who I am. A lot of young football writers are very good. A lot of the people online writing great stuff. There are too many. It's not fair. Yeah, not only one. There are vast number of absolutely fantastic talents available. Anirudh from my office. Yeah, this is sounding so bad. I'm not getting everybody's name out. Yeah.
So that is the end of the podcast, Sharda. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kushal. It was great fun.
And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Yes.